Dark Knight Dynasty is a graphic novel from 1997, written by Mike W. Barr, who has written some gems in the Batman world before. It is an Elseworlds story, which I think I can explain better if I just read the Elseworlds tagline. In Elseworlds, heroes are taken from their usual setting and put into strange times and places, some that have existed, and others that can't, couldn't, or shouldn't exist. The result is stories that make characters who are as familiar as yesterday seem as fresh as tomorrow. That's the tagline. So how is this done with Dark Knight Dynasty? Well, there are 3 stories in this graphic novel, each one separated by a few centuries, and each one dealing with a separate member of the Wayne family, each dealing with a similar threat. This review will be much more different than any other review that I've really done, since there really aren't any consistent characters throughout the entire book, so I can't really talk about character arcs or anything like that. Instead, I will basically be talking about this graphic novel as if it was 3 short stories. Dark Past. Joshua Wainwright is part of the Knights Templar. He is sent on a quest to ransom some pilgrims with a big pile of gold. While the group of knights are sleeping, the gold is stolen, and all of the knights are killed except for Joshua. Joshua sees a castle right in front of him, and he sneaks in. We find that Vandal Savage owns the castle and has stolen the gold that the knights were carrying to carry out some seemingly sinister plan. Joshua is captured, then escapes and seemingly puts a stop to Savage's plan, though he loses a leg, and when he returns to England, he is imprisoned for what everyone perceives to be his lies about what happened to the gold and his fellow knights. Then we see that the Holy Order who Joshua has been telling his story to is led by Vandal Savage. Joshua is then killed. End of Act 1. Why Vandal Savage? I know that this is an Elseworlds story, and Elseworlds are sometimes different just because they have the opportunity to be. But Batman already has an immortal, somewhat deranged villain in his rogues gallery. His name is Ra's al Ghul. Why not just use Ra's in this story? I get that Ra's is immortal through a different device than what Vandal Savage has, but that brings us back to this being an Elseworlds story. This story could have changed the backstory of Ra's al Ghul, and it would have felt more right using him instead of a villain who has fought Batman before, but isn't exactly a Batman villain. A small nitpick, but one that bothered me when I was reading this book. Why does Vandal Savage have Solamnia? Solamnia is this blue lady that I guess he created, and she is used to try and get into Joshua Wainwright's head. But very clearly, she existed long before Vandal Savage knew about Joshua Wainwright. She seems to indicate that he created her, but why would he do this? Solamnia seems to be here just because the story needs Joshua to have an ally who will eventually help him against Vandal Savage. But she really just feels kinda forced and doesn't really have any purpose in this story, in my opinion. It looks like Joshua pushes Vandal Savage into a fire and then disappears deep into space. How did Vandal Savage get back to Earth? How did he infiltrate the Holy Order? Was he always the Holy Priest of the Knights Templar? These things I kinda would have liked to have seen explained, especially how Vandal Savage got from deep in outer space back to Earth. Was he ever in outer space, or was he just pushed into a hole in the ground? The art definitely makes it look like he was pushed into a hole that led into outer space. Oh well, I guess this isn't very important, but it's something that definitely took me out of the story when I was reading it. Joshua says he knows what Vandal Savage is up to, but how? I've read this story twice, and when reading it the second time, I still had no idea what Vandal Savage was up to. How does Joshua know just by looking into a hole that leads into outer space? The art of this section is magnificent. Scott Hampton either painted this entire part of the book, or he did such a good job rendering his art that it appeared to be painted pictures. This is an aid of each section of the book taking place in a different time period, and so the art of each book is meant to evoke that certain time period. And Hampton's art definitely makes me think of an old adventure story set in the midst of medieval times, so it succeeds in that regard. Dark Present. This story is set in the present day, as the title suggests. Bruce Wayne is an adult, his parents are still alive, and Vandal Savage has been a friend to the family since Bruce was a child at least. It is strongly hinted that Bruce's parents would have died when they were supposed to, but Vandal Savage scared off the gunman who almost killed them. While the first story featured Vandal trying to use sorcery to get something in outer space, this story features him using science. A large meteor is coming to Earth, and Wayne Enterprises has set up some kind of satellite that will use a laser to destroy the meteor so it does not destroy Earth. And Vandal, being a higher up in Wayne Enterprises, is trying to subvert this mission so that the meteor is not destroyed. But Thomas finds out, and so Vandal and his lady friend, sort of a combination between Two-Face and the Scarecrow, they kill the Waynes. Bruce begins investigating their death, and he finds out that Vandal is involved. Vandal thinks he has killed Bruce, and then goes up in space to land on the meteor. He is followed by Bruce, who tries to stop Vandal. Vandal and Bruce both plummet to Earth. Bruce is incinerated on re-entry, and Vandal heals back to full health over the course of a night. Vandal Savage genuinely seemed sorry for having to betray the Wayne family in the way that he is. Despite the fact that he is seemingly trying to cause mass genocide, all in search for knowledge, I really do feel like Vandal Savage is more deep of a character than what you might have thought at first glance. It's a little unclear why this space mission is going on near the end of the story. I'm not exactly sure how much time has passed since Vandal altered the course of the laser so that the meteor would not be destroyed, but it seems to me the only reason this space mission is being put together by Wayne Enterprises is so that Vandal, under the pretense of, well, the meteor wasn't destroyed, so we'll have to go up there and destroy it manually, in the vein of Armageddon. Except that he is actually up there to get a glowing jewel thing that is inside the meteor. So, at least with this story, we find out a tiny bit more about Vandal Savage's plan. We still don't know the purpose of his evil schemes, but we seem to have a concrete idea of what he is searching for. As I said, how much time has passed in this story is made a little unclear. Is it over several months or less than a week? If the space mission was really a response to the meteor failing to detonate, then it would take much longer than a week to set that up, right? Even if Vandal never intended on letting the meteor explode, even he would have had a hard time setting up this space mission in advance of the meteor not blowing up. And then the story ends with Bruce's wife, Julie Madison, holding a book titled 1001 Names for Your Baby. So, if this has all taken place over the span of a few months, this is understandable. But if these two only just got married, and it is hinted that they didn't do any kind of baby making until after the wedding, then it is a little hard for me to swallow that Julie is already pregnant. But I get why this is here. This is only Act 2 of a 3-part story, so we need to have Bruce's lineage carry on, even if it is very improbable, at least in my humble opinion. Bruce dresses up like a bat for very much the same reason that he gave in the movie Batman Begins. He needs to hide his own identity to protect his loved ones. But after Vandal's second encounter with Bruce in this getup, Vandal calls him Batman. This isn't a thing in this world, is it? Bruce has gone out as Batman for roughly one night. He hasn't had time to come up with a name, or gadgets, and yet we see him using batarangs. We see that he has a space version of the Bat costume. For a guy who has not spent his entire life preparing to prey on those who would prey on the innocent, it is alarming how already Batman-esque he is in this story. The art in this section of the story is by Gary Frank. Frank is a very solid artist, and I've definitely enjoyed his work on Batman Earth 1. But this seems slightly a step back. It could be that he simply became a better artist over the course of 15 years. And I'm not even slamming his work here. This is some very great work. It's just not as good as what he is later capable of doing, in my opinion. Dark Future. It is the year 2600. One of Bruce Wayne's descendants is the President of the United States, and his sister, Brenna Wayne, is Vice President. He is something of a jerkhole, while she is very compassionate and all around a wonderful human being. She has been very interested in her family history for quite some time. She has discovered that everyone in her family that she has looked into died young and put on a bat costume before they died. She goes and investigates this mysterious prophet in air quotes Lower Gotham, which is basically the planet Earth, while air quotes Upper Gotham is a flying chunk of city where the rich and wealthy live. Anyway, this prophet is Vandal Savage, and I have no idea why he's down here in this filth. There's no tactical reason for him to be down here. It'd make much more sense for him to be the presidential advisor or something like that. Somebody who counts centuries as minutes could do this pretty easily, I think. Anyway, while investigating the prophet, she finds out that he is immortal, and that he is the only guy who was killing the Waynes for all this time. Before this, she suspected that an organization of some kind had been targeting her family. Anyway, she escapes and an attempt is made on her life. She fakes her death and continues to try to wage war on Vandal Savage. She has also figured out that her scumbag brother is in bed with Savage, figuratively speaking, which isn't much of a surprise to anyone who is reading this story. We find out that Savage is trying to bring Upper Gotham down on the planet for a reason I'm not really sure is ever explained. His main goal is the same as it's always been. He wants to find out the real reason why he was made immortal by this mysterious source in outer space. He ends up floating away into outer space, while Brenna Wayne comes back down to Lower Gotham, which is now the only Gotham, thanks to Vandal Savage's plan. And she is free to live her life without any more worries about someone like Vandal Savage trying to kill her like he has the rest of her family. Now, before I get into this story, I guess I'll go ahead and say one positive thing that I really like about it. Wayne Enterprises being called Wayne Universal is a nice touch for a story that's set this far in the future. The idea that in the year 2600, apes are intelligent enough to speak with humans and are considered second-class citizens is a really silly one. I actually don't mind silly ideas being infused with Batman stories. It's why I don't mind the movie Batman and Robin nearly as much as everyone else does. But this story has, so far, been pretty grounded. Even the first story with its sorcery elements and the second story with not so plausible science fiction stuff being used, both of those stories feel much more plausible and grounded than what is honestly a really weird place to take this story for the third and final chapter. I get that the DC Universe is a place where weirdness can happen. Gorilla Grodd is a talking gorilla, and I don't have a problem with that. But consistency is pretty important to me, and this third story in this book just feels wildly inconsistent with the previous two stories. I don't mind the idea of several Batmen over the course of multiple generations. In fact, it's kinda implied by the word Dynasty in the title of the book. And in the first two stories, it implies that Joshua Wainwright was the first to wear a weird Batman costume, and then Bruce Wayne wore one. And then we jump forward some 600 years. And now Brenna Wayne implies that all of her Wayne ancestors died young and put on a weird bat costume before they died. This is taking what is kinda a neat concept and turning it into the most ridiculous thing possible. Exactly what could possibly occur in each generation of this family to make each member of the Wayne family put on a costume? Has Vandal Savage put a curse on the Wayne family or something? Later in the story, Brenna seems to think that someone is actually targeting the Waynes, and we know that the only person who could have been doing this for so long is Vandal Savage. But why? If he really is targeting the Waynes with each generation, first of all, why not kill all of the Waynes in one generation, and then he won't have to deal with them ever again? And two, isn't this kind of a departure from the Vandal Savage of the Dark Present story? That guy seemed remorseful that he would have to kill his friend Thomas Wayne, and yet now he seems to be killing every Wayne for reasons that are unknown to me. Savage claims that all of the Waynes have tried to stop him, but there are multiple problems with this. Number one, it seems like Savage's main goal was to find out what the source of his immortality was. He knows it came from a meteor which seems to only come by every 500 years or so. That's why he was doing stuff in 1200, then in 1996, then in 2600. But it doesn't seem like the meteor comes any more frequently than that. So what were all of those generations of Waynes trying to stop Savage from doing? Did he have some other nefarious goals besides the meteor? It would seem so, otherwise this book just seems really weird and doesn't really seem to explain why Vandal Savage has been killing the Waynes this whole time. I get the feeling the only reason the story took this weird turn of Savage killing every generation of Wayne and every generation of Wayne dressing up like a bat is so that the protagonist of the story can find out that she is in danger and then survive to try and take out Savage. If it had only been two Waynes over the course of 1300 years who dressed up like bats, and one of whom it was not known by anyone except Vandal Savage that he had dressed up, then Brenna would most likely not have dressed up like a bat, and also she probably wouldn't have known to protect herself against an assassination attempt. This is a situation where the motivations of a character, in this case Vandal Savage, are thrown aside and he apparently starts acting completely contrary to how he has been acting in this story, all in aid of the protagonist needing to find out something, and there being no real organic way of her finding this out. I know I'm just nitpicking at this point, but why is Brenna's monkey friend dressed up like Robin? We have seen no evidence that a Robin historically existed in this world, so why would he specifically choose a costume that looks like this? This section of the book seems like a letdown when, for 1300 years, Vandal Savage is trying to find out more about why he is immortal, and he never really gets any resolution. After seeing everything he's gone through, we know that in 500 years he will likely come back to Earth. As far as I'm concerned, Brenna Wayne is celebrating a little too soon. She may not have anything to worry about herself, but what if Vandal Savage comes back and decides to go back to killing people because they are disposable as far as he's concerned? In this regard, the story really feels like it is lacking some kind of resolution. The art in this book is sadly the worst of the whole story. At least the pencils are provided by Bill Sienkiewicz, who I have never especially liked, at least as far as his art is concerned. I get what is going on here. The art in each story is meant to evoke that time period. So the first story is painted like an old tale about knights. The second story looks much more like a traditional superhero comic, but still very solid. And the third story is meant to look grim and dirty, and very sketchy, like Sienkiewicz's art. But even though the goal is to look grimy and sketchy, that isn't something that appeals to me very much at all. Unfortunately, this entire graphic novel started out very strong, but just kinda ended with a fizzle. The idea that Batman is a generational thing is somewhat neat, but I feel like the threats that all of the Waynes are facing just isn't very exciting, and in some ways, each standalone story just seems like a repeat of the previous story, just with new set dressing. I did enjoy the first and second stories, but the third just doesn't really have anything going for it in my opinion. No, let me redact that. I did like the whole thing conceptually, and that includes a Lady Batman in the year 2600, with an even dirtier Gotham than we've ever really seen. But in execution, I don't think this book really delivers in that regard. This book is not at all horrible, but it could have been much better than what it was. If I knew what was in store with this book, I probably would buy it again if I didn't already own it. Part of that is because I am a Batman freak, and I will buy just about any Batman book. But still, even if I wasn't, I probably would buy this if I didn't own it because it's an okay story. Not great, but not horrible either. So let that be what it's worth.